Hi there, I'm Lydia, and today on Typical Books, I'm going to talk about The Pet by Charles L. Grant. This is an awfully shiny book, so I don't know how much I'm going to hold it up because I just don't trust that the light is not blinding all y'all. So this is a tour, probably a book club version of this, out by St. Martin's Press. And it was published in Canada subsequently. This might even be the Canadian edition, I don't know. But it is in pretty good condition considering I found this in a take a book, leave a book as part of a laundromat. So very cool find. There was a few other horror books there that I traded off other horror books. So I didn't need to unhaul them, as the kids say. I simply did bring them to trade. And I do like doing that. That's how I traded books, Joe Nesbo books. I've traded them in Find a Book, Leave a Book. But yeah, The Pet by Charles L. Grant. This is a 1986 release and dedicated to Catherine, who would have been his wife at the time, from what I recall. Advanced praise for The Pet. So a lot of Whitley Strieber, David Morrell, and Robert R. McCammon. This is the story of Donald. Early frost crisps the bracing autumn air, but in the affluent suburb of Ashford, New Jersey, the cold is that of fear. The village has become the new stalking ground for the Howler, a serial killer who has already mutilated 6 New York teens. Panic grows as the murderer strikes in quiet Ashford and strikes again. That was the first thing that caught my eye. High school senior Donald Boyd is being overwhelmed by personal troubles, a shy, long-distance runner who collects animal posters and tells himself stories. Don's life is full of stress, grades, harassment from bullying jocks, and the erotic teasing of local sex kitten Chris Snowden. Chris is the sex kitten name, isn't it? He has newfound love for Tracy, who is the cop's daughter, and the fractured relationship of his parents, who is teetering on the edge after the death of his kid brother Sam, is decayed into an open cesspool of alcohol, anger, ambition, and adultery. Now, I really thought they were talking about Don there, so that this kid would have this downward slide as the serial killer was stalking the streets. And that's kind of how the book starts out, but it doesn't remain like that. Now, I am not as familiar with Charles L. Grant as I ought to be, being the master of quiet horror. I myself have written some quiet horror, and I've read his short stories. This is his first novel that I've read, and I will read more, most definitely, because he's not espoused as the master of quiet horror and the father of quiet horror in a lot of circles for a reason. This is maybe not the strongest entry, I don't know. But I love the cover, I love the look. I'm not a horsey girl by any means, but this does feature this particular horse that is on the cover in full effect. Now, I would continue reading some jacket copy, but it starts to get into spoiler territory, unfortunately, which I really thought that was one of, it's like an unspoken rule that we expect from a jacket copy, especially in '86, before spoiling everything became the norm, which people like to do these days on the internet in trailers and such, is you really don't give away much more than the first couple chapters in all that jacket copy. You want to get like the story and the hook and all that kind of out. Some of the stuff that happens on this jacket copy isn't until like, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through the book. So I thought it was kind of like, kind of ticked me off. I used the book scorer to score this, and it garnered 56 points out of a possible 114. So it sat somewhere about 3.1. So 3 stars out of 5 is what I awarded The Pet from Charles L. Grant. And I had expected a lot more, and perhaps the tenure of such a distinguished writer had really set my expectations a little high. But be that as it may, it did have its draw for me. 3 out of 5 isn't that bad, really, honestly. This story, I couldn't shake it, and this made it so much more enjoyable for me, and I don't know if this will do this for you. If you aren't already just a huge animal lover, like I'm an animal lover, but not like I don't want to be a veterinarian. If you know of someone that wants to be a veterinarian and likes quiet horror, this is the book for them. But I found it so much parallel to young Jeffrey Dahmer. If you've read My Friend Dahmer or seen the movie and have an idea of what, I wouldn't say what shaped him, because that sort of beginning could shape any amount of average, well-adjusted adults. But this the shaping of Jeffrey Dahmer is very similar to the shaping of young Donald Boyd in this book, with having parents that are on the cusp of divorce and having jocks and being maladjusted at school, being teased by those jocks, having like very strange interactions with women. Not that Don is of questioned sexuality in this, but he's young and he seems somewhat chaste in the women around him. One of them is coming on very strong, one of them is very reserved. So like it results in him having sort of like an Archie from Archie Comics relationship with these women, which comes off really weird, and it gets to him. It helps fuel this angst, this rage that's boiling in this young man. And he spends a lot of time talking to animals. Now, he's not talking to dead animals like Jeff Dahmer by any means, but he is spending a lot of time, an inordinate amount of time, with inanimate animals. Be that as it may. They're not dead, they're inanimate. And I'll leave the book to tell you the story of those animals. Except that I will tell you about the horse. One of the things that detracted from the telling of this for me was maybe an experimental storytelling tactic, perhaps, of smushing some words together to create new words and maybe a bit of ambience. The horse, as you can see on the front, if the light is cooperating with me, has this green smoke, this green mist, this green fire, this green eyes, this green steam, this green everything. And to explain it, like, it is used to a very good effect as far as the flickering green fire that surrounds this horse. But quite often, and more often after the first mention of it, it's written as one word: green fire, green light, green mist, mostly green fire, green flames, green eyes and green fire are written together as one word often. And it takes me out of it a lot because I find the tactic is pretentious to a certain degree. Other than that, it's extremely well written though. So I think that's what it is. If it wasn't as tightly written from beginning to end, and what is a really wonderful editing job if it wasn't just completely self-edited by Charles L. Grant himself, which I suspect that he's just that tight of a writer. The green fire, green eyes thing, I don't know. I think that we went a lot easier on that experimental sort of writing in the 80s, so maybe that's part of where that came from. I found it an odd choice. Another thing that I enjoyed very much in this story was the portrayal of the jocks as maybe little monsters of their own. They were horrible, and they treated Don terribly, and everything that they did that would cascade down on him in a sort of a prankster way had real repercussions, and real repercussions that maybe these jocks hadn't foreseen themselves, and how they were setting him up for, like, you know, having to dig himself for 10 years out of the bullshit that they were setting up for him. And it is like malicious, and it is very realistic. On the other hand, I found them all very one note. They were all very Riverdale. Like, if you're a fan of like Archie Comics Riverdale stuff, I don't watch the show. I don't know. This is all based on being like 10 years old and reading Archie Comics. Those are the kids that they're dealing with in these high schools. That said, it is really kind of YA. I don't know about you, but I find that a lot of the 80s horror that I read that isn't super sexy, that isn't like ultra rapey either, is kind of YA standards nowadays. If you have teenagers that aren't in overtly sexual situations where no actual penetrative sex happens, and there is like kissing and perhaps like petting, and they aren't using like copious amounts of drugs or alcohol, and they aren't in super gory situations, I mean, that sort of fits the bill to YA, in my opinion, I believe. So if you are looking for some YA titles, I think this Charles L. Grant is a really good pick. Or if you're looking to send somebody who is just getting into horror and is a young adult some new titles of old books, then send them maybe some Charles L. Grant. I found it an enjoyable read. It was a little plodding to me, a little slow here and there, and not just because of the quiet nature, because I do appreciate some quiet horror. It could have been because it was teens and teen scenarios and teen situations. Also because the serial killer aspect wasn't as big as I had anticipated. although the serial killer is written extremely brutally and very well and very stark, and he's very different from everybody else. So I really did enjoy that. So be that as it may, it still sits at a 3 out of 5 and recommended for those who like quiet horror, YA, or animal horsey situations. Right now I'm like, oh my god, almost halfway through Voices in the Snow. It just stopped snowing here. Like last week was the last time we had a snowstorm here in the middle of May in Canada. I should be sick to death of the snow, and here I am reading about the most interesting snowbound horror story I've read in a very long time. So Voices in the Snow, I hope that this is made into a movie someday, because I could stand watching this in the middle of August. So that is it for The Pet by Charles L. Grant. Have you read The Pet by Charles L. Grant or any other Charles L. Grant? I would really be interested to hear more about what I should go with next by him, because I do want to add more Grant to my to be read pile. Let me know what you've been reading in the meantime, and have a nookie spooky day.